Thank you. Okay, which brings us to item 10. Actuarial valuation policy, second reading.
Right, and I'm gonna ask Rick Reed to come up and our friends from Milliman here, and thank you, Doctor, appreciate that very much. Yeah, grab your name tag is up, get yourselves located. Everybody excited about actuarial valuation policy right now, huh? Is that your feeling?
Listen to actuarial.
Come on, big finish, this is a good item.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, members of the board. In November, we presented a proposed valuation policy based on the new funding solution, AB 1469. And it was several discussions about that, and we were instructed to bring back a proposed policy for the next board meeting, and so we have done that. Now, we haven't made any changes based on the input that we received back in November. So we are prepared to, Mark and Nick are prepared to present a full presentation, or they can answer questions, and if you review the policy, you can adopt it at that time. So I'm going to turn over to Nick and Mark to add any comments. Oh, there's one other comment that the proposed policy won't have any effect until around 2017. So what we propose is to try out the policy, see how it works, and then make any changes as necessary as we go along. So with that, I'm going to let Nick and Mark add any comments, and then, Mr. Chair, we'll be prepared for your comments.
Thank you. So to the extent that you can really bring it to, assuming that we all read the materials, if you could really keep it at a high level and bring us into like the key points and what you want us to focus in on, that'd be terrific.
Yeah, if I may, I agree with everything Rick just said. This won't actually go into effect until, it won't change any contribution rates until 2017. We believe that our proposal does a very good job of reflecting very complex legislation. We went over it in some level of detail in November. We'd be happy to go over it in any level of detail today, but our best recommendation is for the board to approve what we already presented in November and to see how the numbers roll out over the next couple of years. There will be another actuarial firm auditing us in that time. That would give you the opportunity to see if they agree with our interpretation of the legislation, and if you desire, we will be happy to go through the PowerPoint, but we don't actually feel that's necessary at this time.
I would agree unless there's someone who really wants to go through for a second time, seeing no strong desire for that. Anything else, Mr.
That summarizes
Collier?
Yeah, we just view this as a test drive. You're not buying anything, but let's go out and hit the road.
Yeah, and so when do the other second set of eyes look at your, when do the second set of actuaries?
The proposed review of Milliman's work will be sometime in 2016.
Thank you. Okay. Any questions or comments?
So does that come back?
This would be for an action.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Zeiger?
I just have a real quick question. We've had over the intervening years a number of people who greatly differ with our own actuarial valuations and keep finding us in arrears. What will these people say about this current?
Not
So-
speaking for them, but they're likely to say that you should use, right now, probably a 2% interest rate assumption, so,
We can expect more of the same.
yes.
That's never gonna change it.
Yeah, I know, you can hope.
Ms. Dillon?
So I have a couple of questions. So on TRB 64, number 3, it talks about the actuarial obligation for post-2014 services for new benefits. Is that someone coming into the system? So it's a new benefit to somebody coming into the system, right?
Right.
Not or if, well, I don't even wanna go down that road, so I won't. So, right now, contributions fund those benefits, the benefits that are earned right now are being funded by the contributions that are coming in. But if some point that doesn't happen, we're gonna have an unfunded liability in the post-2014. Are we gonna start thinking about what plan A, B, or C might be if and when that happens?
I'll answer, I don't know what the exact answer to that is, but just to clarify Dana's point, on the new people coming in, the state, has a responsibility for the pre-90 benefit structure, but there's,
Right?
yeah, pre-1990 benefit structure benefits, but there's a certain amount of benefits that there isn't anyone directly responsible, if there's an unfunded developments. We do have contributions coming in that theoretically are equal to the value of the benefits being earned. So we should, if all our actual assumptions were met exactly, we'd go along fine. But what's going to happen, either we're going to get a small surplus or we're going to get an unfunded level. We're not concerned about that, in the short term, because it's going to be so small compared to everything else, but it's definitely something we'll want to monitor, and obviously with everything that's gone on, that this is a small piece compared to the big thing, which is which was the funding solution,
Right.
but we'll keep an eye on it, but it's not something that we're particularly concerned about right now.
I think that we just need to be, highly aware of it, because at one time, the really big one was a lot smaller, and it took us 10 years to get somewhere, so.
Yeah, I think the board we will give you the information on that, and the board needs to look at that carefully every year to see how it's progressing.
And then, I think that's for the MPP, so I'll hold off on that one. Alrighty, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, this is an action item. So, would I entertain a motion? Ms. Hendrick?
I move that we, accept staff recommendation.
It's moved by Ms. Hendricks to adopt the recommendation. The report is submitted. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Dillon. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is item 11. Mr. Reed? Rick?
Mr. Chair, every 2 years we do a valuation of the Medicare Premium Payment Program. We also take a look at assumptions for this program that are different than the defined benefit or the defined benefit supplement or the cash balance plan. Because this is a medical plan, paying medical premiums, there are some assumptions that are different. And we take a look at that separately because the assumptions are more volatile. They change more often, they're harder to predict. And so instead of taking a look every 4 years, we do it every 2 years. And so we've done so again. Nick and Mark have completed a review of those assumptions. They have a letter that's attached to that with recommendations. And so staff recommend that the board approve these assumptions for the April Medicare Premium Payment Program valuation. Again, they're here to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments for Mr. Reed or our actuaries on this item? Seeing none, there's a staff recommendation. We'd entertain a motion to approve. Mr. Bartow.
On the motion to approve staff's recommendation, I think it would be prudent to identify which assumptions we're talking about. I believe they're the ones found on TRB 76, 77, and 78, but they're not specified in the resolution. So I'd like to make sure that at least that the vote is clear, or the motion is clear, and the minutes can be clear.
We agree that was a comprehensive list, 76, 77, and
What's that,
78.
Mr. Collins?
76 through 78 is a comprehensive list of the assumptions we're recommending.
Thank you.
So the recommendation is to adopt, the motion is to adopt the staff recommendation based upon the assumptions provided in the Milliman report on pages 76, 77, and 78. That motion was made by Ms. Dillon and seconded by Ms. Hendricks. Is there any questions or further discussion? Seeing none, we'll entertain, we'll take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm the Seahawks. Why didn't they just run the ball, you guys? I know you're from
Probability, probability.
Run the ball, Seahawks.
It's all game theory. The New York Times.
Pretty
did-
rotten game theory.
They tried to outfox the
I gotta look
genius.
that up. Broke my heart.
Okay.
It's all Pete Carroll's fault.
No,
It
Pete,
is.
we love Pete
It
Carroll.
is Pete Carroll's fault.
We love
He
Pete
made the
Carroll.
call. He made the call.
It's okay.
It's okay, people make mistakes. I'm just
Mr.
saying.
Alman, do you have an opinion? Mr. Alman?
There we go.
You could always be a Jet
Actually,
fan.
it's go 49ers, but they weren't in the.
You want to really feel bad? It could be worse.
Yeah, you could be a Jets fan.
Okay, item 12, all kidding aside, item 12, Ms. Mary Ann Ashley, the federal legislation and regulations.
Hi, Mary.
Hello, good afternoon, members of the board. I have a very brief informational update on legislation. We're in the first year of the new two-year legislative cycle. So to date, there's only been one measure that's been introduced that we've identified as having an impact to CalSTRS, and that's Senate Joint Resolution 1 by Senator Bell. The resolution urges Congress and the President to repeal the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset. We will be analyzing that resolution and bringing it back to the board in April in order for the board to adopt a position. The final date to introduce bills this year is February 27th, so we will continue to monitor and track all bills that are introduced and analyze those and bring those appropriately to the board as needed. So at the next board meeting in April, there is potential that we would have additional bill analyses to present, as well as there's potential for an additional legislative proposal developed by CalSTRS to be presented. I'm happy to say that for our board-sponsored legislation, we do have authors for all four of them. The technical housekeeping bill is going to be authored by the Assembly PERS Committee. The membership issue cleanup bill is authored by Assembly Member Bonilla. The board authority over the chief operating officer and the chief financial officer will be authored by Assembly Member Cooley, and the co-sponsored bill with CalPERS and CalSTRS to address the investment procurement process will be authored by Senator Hall. And that concludes my update. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Ashley. Any questions for Ms. Ashley? Thank you. Dana, Ms.
Could you
Dillon?
just get that out to us in an email, please? Yes. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And if anything else arises at the Capitol between now and the 27th that's pertinent to us, we'll be informed. Yes. Okay, terrific. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mary.
All right, item 14, System Risk Management Report, Ms. Mattson. Hello again, Robin.
Danielle. I have a very short presentation, and then we're here to answer any questions you might have, but I wanted to introduce the gentleman in my organization who is actually shepherding the Enterprise Risk Management Program at this point in time, Phil Burkholder. So he is the manager of our policy risk and compliance area, and I just wanted to make sure that I introduced him to you so you could understand who's doing the legwork behind these presentations. So we have made, so in terms of what I wanted to make sure that I shared with you today, and then again, all of executive staff here is to address any questions you might have about particular risks, is that we've made a couple of reporting changes to you in this presentation. We have identified a new risk category, and then we wanted to give you an update about how we're going to connect the enterprise risk management assessment process, monitoring process at the executive level down to the program areas. So I wanted to make sure that we provided that update. In terms of the reporting changes, you might have noticed a couple of things. We tried to create a one-page dashboard, and staff laughed, and of course they were right. So unfortunately, it's 4 pages, but we wanted to provide a summary or closer to a heat map of the enterprise risks and the sub-risks that we've identified, so you could have more of an at-a-glance view of where we think we are in terms of the mitigation, the confidence that we have in our mitigation, and what we see as the impact probability and velocity associated with those risks. So again, it's just a summary. There's no new information here. It's just providing you with an overview of that information in a way that hopefully you can get a feel for where we are on a macro level basis. So I would welcome your comments on that if it's helpful, if it's not helpful.
Got a couple questions for you, Robin. Paul?
So I find this very useful. It was a lot easier to kind of sort of see not only what staff thinks the risks are, but what most importantly, what staff thinks the relative risks are. Because it's a long list, but which ones are the biggest risks. And by these criteria, it seems to me that staff thinks that 9A is the most serious risk to the organization. That is, that investments might be seen by interested parties to be in conflict with our risk factors and environmental, social, and government investment. And the reason I say that is those are the only two, that's the only risk for which it's determined that the impact is high, the probability is high, the velocity is going to happen really quickly, and most important, we don't have much confidence we're a yellow rather than a green in terms of our confidence we can solve the problem. So what we're saying is that there's a 61 to 80% likelihood that this can happen, and that the impact, and I'm just quoting from the way in which these categories are defined, would be, quote, significant impact threatening business unit viability. So I would just like to understand what's an example of a circumstance in which our investments might be seen by interested parties to be in conflict with our risk factors that would be that likely and that serious a threat to business unit viability?
Well, I think it's defined that one under reputation, so it doesn't, in that example you gave, Paul, I wouldn't see it affecting investments viability, but, you know, it's under a risk factor of reputation, I believe. I don't have it in front of me. So it's interpreted relative to that issue in the organization, not in terms of obviously affecting the portfolio. So the real example, the real life example of that would be the hard one you dealt with 2 years ago, obviously, an unexpected event, a shooting in Connecticut, unpredictable, unanticipated, not prepared, reaction was difficult, it causes reputational damage to an organization. So it's solely within that context of it, but obviously it had no lasting viability of the investment part of the organization. So this one has only that veneer around the ones that are on this page, if we're on the reputational one, are revolve around issues of public relations, which obviously corporate businesses manage.
So we're not saying that that all 10 of these categories are of equal importance. In other words,
Well, if you value the reputation of your business,
I understand
then
that, but
you would measure it.
Obviously.
I wasn't judging it. I'm just trying to say, but each of these needs to be carried in its own light. So most people wouldn't view necessarily public relations as valuable as lost money, but it is its own category. So, you know, you're rating it in terms of that factor. That's all I was saying.
Because, for example, 7A, which by these criteria is not as serious a problem, is an information security breach or incident at CalSTRS, such as, you know, member data is stolen by a hacker like at Anthem. I mean, I would think that's a more important concern of the organization. So I guess I'm wondering whether, because the way this is presented, we're not making distinctions between which of the 10 risks are more important than others. And
That's a different matter.
I'm wondering whether
Yeah.
this board needs some sense of that, because otherwise I think it's.
That's fair.
Right, and so what we've done here is expose that, which then has brought up a communication challenge, which we need to address. And I think your questions are very good ones. You know, in displaying this, we're displaying it in the context of the overall risk definition, but then one can interpret it in various ways if we haven't created a matrix of priorities amongst those risks or assess them as compared one to the other. They're being assessed independently. So that becomes a dilemma.
I mean, it seems to me that if we have an enterprise risk management
Right.
policy or strategy, that we need to start by kind of determining which risks we think are most important to the organization.
Right, and so again, I think that this mechanism has brought that to our attention, which is good, because we haven't done that work, and I think it's work that we can bring back to you in terms of how would we see that as a management team, and then get your feedback or input as a board as to our assessment, but we would want to do that work first, and then share that with you at the
Yeah, it
next
should-
reporting structure.
It should drive our resource allocation. I mean, the best example, of it's not on here now, of course, is the biggest risk was insolvency, flat out.
Right.
That was, I mean, we didn't have to have a rating scheme, we knew it, and the entire focus of the organization was on that. So we don't have necessarily that same kind of touchstone driving this current set, but I value that. I heard a little bit of what you were saying, so that's good, we'll do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, very good input, thank you, thank you.
So Robin, I just have a request. Sure. Those of us that have a tendency to read these things really late at night, can we actually get the legend on each one of the pages, please? The legend was in the PowerPoint, and so I had to bounce back and forth between the PowerPoint and actually what was in our written materials. It would really help me.
And we appreciate that as well. That was our intention, and we failed to execute, so we'll try again.
Anyone else, questions or comments? And,
So there's a couple of other things that I just wanted to make sure we brought to your attention. The next one is that we did create a new specific risk category around transformational change. You've just accepted our recommendation to award a contract in a very large-scale technology project. As the executive staff, we have had risks and sub-risks within various categories associated with this, but our impetus here was to call this out as a very specific kind of risk so that we can make sure that we're thinking about it in those terms, and that we can present that to you in those terms. So again, tying into the pension solution discussion, making sure that we are being transparent in terms of the risks that we see associated with business transformation from the human and the vendor management and the budgetary perspective. And so, again, we did that in our last review of the enterprise risks, and we're recommending to you, because this is not one of the categories that you had previously accepted, we're recommending to you that this is something that we will, at least in the next 5 years, be reporting on because of the significance of the effort. So, again, I'm just looking for input. And then the last thing I wanted to make sure we brought to your attention is that we are working on connecting the various risk processes that we have in place in the organization to the enterprise risk management cycle that we've established. So I think we have a robust but decentralized risk management process across various components of the organization. We want to make sure, we're exercising the top-down assessment in a rhythm, on a quarterly basis. We want to make sure we link that into the division and branch level processes that are going on. And so to do that, we're in the process of bringing in some expertise to help us make sure those connections exist in a way that can inform the executive discussions. And so I just wanted to come back to you with the timelines that we're looking at, having that process incorporated. Not to say that it doesn't exist, but we don't have a neat way to roll things up and make sure that what we're talking about at the operating level is in fact linked into what we're discussing at the executive level, other than just with the communication vehicle through executive staff. So we want to make sure we've got that formalized linkage. And then I think we talked about in the ARM committee yesterday, some process to make sure that at that lower level, we're incorporating the risks identified in internal audit results and external audit results back into the risk management process at that divisional level. So again, just wanting to make sure we show you those connections. And then the real purpose of this document is to make sure that if you have questions or concerns about what we're identifying as risks or the mitigation activities that we're actually enacting, also make you confident in the fact that we're managing risks appropriately. So everyone is prepared to answer any questions about the risk areas that you might have.
Any questions or comments? Just for the board, Sharon and I, when we met with staff in preparation for this week, speaking with Ms. Madsen, we definitely walked away with the sense that there's a thinking and a plan of overseeing risk within the organization and really being sensitive to it on, I think, a very high, high level. People are thinking about the risks that are known and the unknown risks. So anyway, it's a 4:40, but it was reassuring to hear some of the comments. And one of the agenda items for next April, in the April meeting on the agenda, is a specific issue in closed session that we'll be dealing with and speaking with the chair of the Audits and Risk Committee, Mr. Rosenstiel, and myself, and conferring with council and leadership of the staff. We're going to deal with that in closed session as a separate issue. Ms. Dillon and then Mr. Rosenstiel, and then we'll move on to the next item.
So really quickly, I guess it's 8, trying to think of where it is on the matrix. So it's under informational security, I think. So it's part of, I can't find the bigger whatever. So Robin, I'll just tell you what page to go to. It's TRB 150. And it's 8, operational CalSTRS goal, business objective risk, mitigations, and number 2 is red. It says we're on schedule. We're supposed to be done by this December. So why do we have that as a red?
Do you want me to? Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so this is really about our Business Resumption Center and our ability to enact that business resumption process, and the fact that our impact analysis is old, and so it doesn't reflect how we are necessarily operating now. So the action is to hire a consultant, but that doesn't solve the problem. So once we hire the consultant, we still have work to do to put those, to identify those business processes that are critical and to understand how we would recover from a lack of ability to run those.
Okay, so while it starts with hire a consultant, it's more with getting all the analysis done. Okay, alrighty, thank you.
The consultant is not going to fix the underlying problem.
Yeah,
They're going to help
got it.
us, but.
Mr. Rosenstiel?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that yesterday at Audit and Risk Management, we had a discussion about sort of who takes ownership of different risk areas, because right now what happens is an audit of any area, including investment risk or anything like that, goes through ARM, even though if you look on page,
Right.
on attachment 2, we've decided that there are only 2 of these risk categories that are owned by ARM. So it's a little inconsistent. ARM owns 2 risk categories, but ARM owns audits of all risk categories. And so we're trying to figure out what to do with that. I think we're going to try to address that inconsistency a little bit when ARM, at our next meeting in June, takes up our charter. But one of the things we're thinking about is that we should at least have audits that are regarding something other than the 2 risks that ARM owns, at least presented or transmitted to the committee that does own them, or the full board if it's the full board that owns them, so that somehow we're closed that loop.
Yeah, I heard that conversation, Paul, and it sounds like next meeting, looking at that charter, could really
Yeah.
clean things up for going forward.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. Brings us to our CEO report. Jack Inez.
I like two things. I just wanted to remind you that for April, we are doing the RFP selection for fiduciary counsel with you. So presumably there'll be at least 3 bidders brought to you for interviews, and that can take up to an hour per bid. So that's, I think you ought to. I'll work with Harry and Sharon on actually blocking the time so we're fresh when we do that. But it does mean it's about a half a day for that RFP process. So get ready for that, since that's an important contract for you. And then the second thing, I was going to turn to Eric here at this point, but hopefully you noticed that I highlighted the legislation that passed in Illinois around their secure choice plan. And if you follow the politics of Illinois, that's actually pretty interesting that that bill passed there. I mean, this is a state where politics are not easy. We know that. And it is ground zero for public pension debate. I mean, unending friction around defined benefit plans in this state, legal challenges all the way up to the Supreme Court, governors resting their races on public pension funding, and they pass a bill like a secure choice plan in Illinois. So, I don't know if it's a bonfire, but there clearly is a fire going on around this idea. And the bills are appearing in more and more states. Some of them are gentler than others in terms of their impact. But like any big issue, it starts with these small efforts and to see if there's traction around them. So I do think it's important because it affects the debate around retirement security. I mean, these things are not insular issues from a social movement perspective. So to the extent they start to change some of the conversation to the broader lack of retirement security, that's probably a more thoughtful conversation. So we don't usually talk about the California progress as much here. So I was going to, says Eric, you're the acting director. You got double duty on this, and maybe you can tell people where things stand.
Sure. Like as you said, and as Grant mentioned, I moonlight as the acting executive director of Secure Choice. Actually, today, about 45 minutes ago, was our deadline for proposals for the market analysis and financial feasibility study. We expect to have that contract in place around March. We're in the midst of executing a contract for legal services, so those two together will conduct a study of financial feasibility in the state. We expect those to be completed by the fall. And it's expected that we'll introduce legislation probably near the end of the year. One big hurdle to our program would be
What is that?
Church bells.
Our legislation requires that we get approval from the Department of Labor as to whether or not the program is a employee benefit plan under ERISA. But just this week, the Obama budget for 2016 includes financing for Department of Labor to kind of shepherd along these proposals. So that it could be a good sign for us. I know other states that have tried things in a similar vein, it's taken 2 to 2.5 to 3 years to get those approvals. So if we could get that sped along, then it could make implementation much easier. I guess I'm just here to answer any questions if anybody has some.
Well, I think what's different
what covers the
now-
details
now
more.
is when you come back with that authorizing legislation, you won't be a lone ranger out there in the country. I mean, this could be a very different political context for you than it was when we first saw the legislation pass here, and you're really breaking all the ground. We've got other bills being passed in other areas. It's going to be more sensible to move this to the next phase. I think you're.
In addition to us in Illinois, Minnesota has their RFP out right now, which is timed pretty closely with ours, and the state of Connecticut too is studying a plan. So there's a lot of work being done through the Georgetown Center for Retirement Initiatives, who's kind of coordinating amongst the states that are considering plans like these. And there's been quite a few that have passed bills, and more states that are introducing bills. Kind of dovetailing into what you were saying about Illinois and their issues with the public pensions. State of Kansas, similar situation. that state treasurer is sponsoring a bill in that state to implement a plan similar to Secure Choice.
Is the financial services industry getting more constructive in their perception of this?
You know, I can't really speak to that, but from what I hear, no. I guess that's a short answer.
We'll have to see where that goes then. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, so item 17 is items referred to the committee by the board. Were there any, Ms. Yamani? I don't.
No, we're gonna do 16 though.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Business for no
That's your final
oversight.
big report. Yeah.
Oh.
More oversight.
Wishful thinking, yeah. Okay.
Nice building in Riverside.
Come on up, Mr.
Yeah, I like
Oh, yeah,
that
they're
photo.
nice.
Yeah, very
Beautiful.
nice, yeah.
That's gonna be the next offsite, is that the?
You know what floor we're on?
We'll have to,
Mission Inn.
That's right.
yeah.
It's right block away.
Okay.
Do that.
They're bowling
Mission Inn.
nearby?
It's the Mission is just a block from that offices there that we'll be doing, yeah.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Graham Finley with Grant Thornton. Here to present our regular independent oversight report on the Business Renew project, which of course pension solution and data preparation. Of course, I'm going to start with pension solution. And as we talked about in November, really when we're talking about the pension solution project at this stage, there are really two elements to the discussion. One is the procurement process, which has already been discussed in some length today. And the second is the readiness of the project to begin work with the implementation vendor. So I've got a few things to say about the procurement piece, but I don't see the need to sort of retread all of the discussion we had earlier. But I do have some things I want to talk about on readiness. So first thing, a couple of brief remarks, I guess, on the procurement process. I guess I will just reiterate, I think, a lot of the conversations happened before. Our opinion is that CalSTRS has really done a pretty good job with this procurement. It was a well-founded methodology that they've executed to the letter by the book, and they've really been very cognizant of risks through the whole process. And we think they've done a pretty good job of trying to identify lessons learned from other projects, apply those to the procurement process, and I think they're in as good a position as you could reasonably expect an organization to be at this point in the project lifecycle. So due credit there. However, as we've talked a few times over the course of the afternoon, the finish line of the procurement is really just the starting line for the project. And so the next topic is really what happens now and how ready is the project to move forward. And unfortunately, it's a fact of life that no matter how good and diligent a job an organization does in thinking through risks and what could go wrong on a project, inevitably things will go wrong, and things will go wrong that you never actually anticipated. It's just a fact of life. And so how do you prepare for that? And there's some questions that were brought up earlier about lessons learned, on other projects, and I think the things that Mayor and Leon and Ben said around lessons learned from their experiences are very much on point. I certainly echo them. There are a couple of other things, though, that I would suggest are pretty relevant and bear, on what the project is going to be doing over the next several months. The first is because of the unpredictable nature of the issues and challenges that will face a project, the only way to truly prepare for that is to have a robust and agile organization that can respond to whatever turns up and respond in a way that's fast and fact-based and draws the whole organization with it. And that's certainly something we've seen with organizations that have handled these projects well, is that they have an agile organization that can make decisions quickly and make them based on the real facts, and that they have strong processes and strong staff in place. So that's a big piece of what we'll be looking for. The second, I think, thing we've seen again and again is the organizations that tend to do well with these large, complex, very challenging projects are organizations that can look the truth in the face and make hard decisions even when they don't like what they see. Unfortunately, where we've seen organizations that have had problems, what you'll often find is that the organization will sort of see the world as the way they'd like to see it, rather than the way it actually is. You know, they start to tell themselves stories and then believe their own stories about the way they'd like the world to be rather than the way the world is. And so organizations that can really see through that and say, you know, we don't like this situation, but this is what it is, and we have a hard decision to make, and we're going to come to the, you know, the appropriate governance level and have that hard discussion. Organizations that can do that really have a very good track record with these kind of endeavors. Our experience to date is that CalSTAS is actually pretty good in that regard, but that's certainly going to, I think, be part of our role as the project progresses, is keeping in check on, you know, is the perception of project leadership and executive leadership of where things are really a true reflection of the facts on the ground, and are decisions being made that reflect that truth. So what I want to talk a little bit about is the process that the project is going to be going through in the next several months as they get ready for the vendor to come on board, and then how we're going to be monitoring that process. So in terms of project readiness, we're really going to be making a lot of focus in the next 2 to 3 months over how ready the project team is and CalSTAS as an organization is to begin working with CGI Sagitech and to hit the ground running when they start execution of design, development, implementation. When I spoke to you in November, I introduced a readiness assessment checklist that we plan to start using, and at that time I said we'd begin to assess the project's readiness at the point in time that they awarded or made an intent to award decision to a particular vendor. Well, that time is now. So from today forward, basically, we're going to be starting the formal effect of reviewing various aspects of readiness of the project and sitting down with the project and talking about that. And then when I come back in April to talk to you, it'll be the first time that I'll be showing you sort of a populated scorecard. Of course, we're having conversations with the project team and with Chris and his team on an ongoing basis. But part of my role of the next 3 to 4 months will be to communicate our assessment of the readiness of the project to begin working with CGI. Of course, the expectation is not that the project is going to be ready, you know, immediately, and that when I'm here in April, that everything's going to be a check mark with a green against it. But the plan should be that the project, say by end of May, early June, has all of the main areas of readiness addressed and is basically a mechanism ready to start working with the vendor on a productive basis. I'm going to go over the various elements of the checklist in a second, but there's a few areas that I want to highlight in terms of main priority for us. The first is staffing. A point had been made earlier on about the importance of the A-team from the vendor. I would certainly echo that, but equally, being fully staffed on the CalSTAS side is equally important with the people with the right skills and expertise. In November, when I last talked to you, there were several key slots that had either recently become vacant or were in the process of being filled. A couple of those have now been filled. There's a new business lead for the project as well as a new procurement lead. However, the project management position is still open, and that's probably the most critical of all of them. And so the project and Chris's team is going through the process right now of identifying candidates for that project manager position, but that is obviously a very critical position that needs to get filled as soon as possible with the person who's really going to be the point person in directing the project once CGI Sagitech turns on board. A second area is in the area of processes. Again, there's work going on here right now, but there are several of the key administrative processes that are not yet fully defined, both from a process step perspective as well as a tools perspective, and that's something we'll be working with the team over the next several months. So some examples would be some of the key project management processes around scheduling and timekeeping, the contract and vendor management processes. So this is the real detailed stuff about how are you going to evaluate vendor deliverables, who's going to be doing reviews, how do you do billing and invoicing, those kinds of things. And then the third area is in integration with other efforts. You know, I'm going to be talking about the data preparation project in a minute. You may remember the Enterprise Information Management, or the EIM initiative that CalSTAS did in the summer. Both of those have a strong share in the relationship that CalSTAS has with the data and have an impact on the pension solution project. So part of what we're looking for is integration of those efforts, so it's clear what the dependencies are and how information will be communicated from one to the other, so that there isn't an undue impact on the pension solution by something slipping or a decision not being made. So I'd like to talk briefly about each of the categories, and then we can talk a little bit about the reporting process as well. So these are the things that we're going to be looking at, basically starting today and through early June, I expect, when the vendor is expected to really start work. So business requirements is obviously a key area. There's some administrative processes around how requirements management is going to be done, the tools associated with requirements traceability and so on. There's also the assignment of subject matter experts and stewards, so it's clear who the owner within CalSTRS is for particular requirements. Then another area, we want to be sure that CalSTRS has unanimity and clarity on what the requirements actually mean, so that CalSTRS speaks in one voice when they're talking to CGI about what the requirements mean. Contract management and oversight, we talked about that a little already. You know, there's a dedicated contract management function that's being set up. We think that's a really good thing and will pay benefits. But how that process will work, who's assigned to it, and what the deliverable management and change management processes are going to be. Data readiness, we've talked a lot about data in the past. What is the data strategy? What is the connection with the data preparation project? How is that information going to be leveraged to support the data conversion and cleansing strategy? Who are the data stewards, and who is going to be making decisions around data quality? Financial and resource management, there are a series of processes around budgeting, staffing, things as apparently straightforward as timesheets. It seems like a minor thing, but you wouldn't believe the amount of time and staff frustration that things that like timesheets can cause if they're not planned out in advance. So things like that. Governance, obviously, we spent a lot of time talking about governance, and there's been a lot of work done already around governance, both at a project and a program level. But since there'll be some turnover and transition in the sponsorship processes, there'll be a new project manager. We want to make sure that those processes are solid and in place and that the project is ready to make decisions. Organizational change management, talked about that already as well. Communicating to the staff what's coming, making sure that the organization is aware and the organization understands where the challenges are going to be, both from a user perspective, the people who are going to be using the system, but also from a project team perspective, to make sure that the people within CalSTRS who are going to be on the project team are fully committed to the project and ready to engage. Performance management. So this is making sure that the project understands how success will be measured. And I'm not talking here about schedule and costs, but ultimately, how is CalSTRS going to measure whether this project was a success after it's gone live? And having clarity on that early on, so everybody is aware of what will be measured once the system starts going into production and are ready to start reporting that. And finally, project management, so the project management office processes, how the schedule is going to be maintained, how resource management is going to be done, issue and risk management, all of those processes. And then finally, technology. What technology infrastructure needs to be put in place, things as simple as power, the processes for installing hardware and software, getting access, either for vendor staff or CalSTRS staff to the environments. So that's sort of the checklist of things that we're going to be looking at over the next several months. There was a question earlier about level of detail, what would be an appropriate level of detail to report to the board. Our intent had been for at least the next several months as we're going through this readiness process, that this is what we would be reporting to you in terms of progress in these areas. And if there were any issues or challenges that we thought were worthy of bringing up to the board level around these areas, just so you had pretty good visibility into the level of readiness for the project. So at that, I'd pause and ask if you've got any questions on the pension solution.
I don't see any. Now I do.
Okay.
Well, one second, Mr. Rosensteel.
So, looking at the report in the agenda materials, so you present, you produce monthly oversight reports, is that right? So the board doesn't get those. Those go to Chris and his staff?
And to the project sponsor and project manager of each of the projects.
Okay, so then what you're sending to us is a summary or what you're delivering
An abbreviated digest, I guess.
An abbreviated digest. So as of the time that you present to us, this is, the information you're providing to us is current as of today?
What happens usually is that we create the board materials based on the report, the most recent report that was delivered to CalSTRS. If anything happens in the period between us creating the board materials and the date that I present something in the PowerPoint, then we'll update the PowerPoint if it's a material change, because otherwise it would be, several weeks potentially out of date just because of the cycle of the reporting.
Yeah, I guess my concern is just to make sure we're getting, we're not getting old information.
Right.
And
If
also
something's
that
happened
if
in the last
sometimes,
few weeks, then
something
we've-
occurs between meetings, like it was November since our last meeting, that we don't wait 3 months to get notified if there's something the board needs to know about, given that you're assisting Chris and the project staff, but you're consultant to us, so you would, yeah.
We also, Graham and Chris and I also do monthly briefings with Harry and Sharon also to keep them apprised. Right.
Good. And then there's a sentence in here that says the scope of oversight assessments is limited to project activities only and do not include CalSTRS operational activities. So is that the issue that arose with Business Direct and?
That's exactly.
Okay, so how are we addressing that then with Pension Solutions?
So we've had some conversations since Business Direct went live about, and part of the reason I think some of the materials in here about getting clarity early on performance measures, about making sure that part of our role is monitoring the development of those measures and then agreeing on what our role should be once elements of the system go live. And this is a little bit of the pension solution will be a slightly different animal to Business Direct because it's a multiple phase implementation where you will have pieces going live and then the rest of the project is still ongoing. So it's not as if like a project stops and then you're live. You've got a project going on and you're live at the same time with proportions of it. And so what we have to, we haven't, I think, finalized the agreement, but what our role will be after elements of the project are live and they're in operation, but there are other parts of the project that are still ongoing as well, and how we report that to you, that's still under discussion.
So I'm not sure I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understood the answer.
Earlier is, as Graham says, we're gonna have a multi-phase project, so when we go live with a certain, it'll be actually in production and will be operational. At the same time, in parallel, you'll still have project activities going at the same time. So what we're working out how to address is how they continue to report on the project, but then also do that kind of stabilization reporting on the stuff that's operational, which is what.
So Grant Thornton will start to address that.
That's what
at
we're
that
trying
point.
to work out, how
Okay,
the timeline
good.
for that stabilization period and how we can do that.
Okay.
Ms. Dillon?
So Graham, we're gonna get a lot more of this dashboard from you as you start to get more in depth on the the pension solution project. It's really hard to read the font that's in the graph. Can we just put it in a different font, please? Sure. And then, to Paul's point, it seems like if we're getting changes on the slides that you present while we're here, if we could get those slides, maybe we'd have some added comfort too, because all we have access to is what is already out of date. You know what I mean? So if anything changes, you update your slides for your presentation.
Yes.
We don't get those. So maybe after you do your presentation, if we could get those.
Oh, I see, I didn't actually realize that, okay.
And then we're gonna have the most current information, at least to go back to, not the information that we actually have that's already 7 weeks late.
And actually, Dana, we do, any changes that are made to the slides, regardless how late, we will update. You get the most current changes that are made. So we.
Do we get those emailed to us?
No, they would show up on Graham's slides, but you don't get them ahead of time. So if that's what you're asking for, ahead of time, we'll figure out how we can get those to you ahead of time.
I mean, we don't get anything afterwards, so I don't think we get the updates.
Okay.
Thanks.
We'll make sure we do that.
Thanks.
Ms. Hendrick?
Yeah, I was just gonna make a follow-up suggestion off of Paul's comments and what Dana's saying and other conversations. I'd like to suggest, since Harry and I meet, for these monthly briefings with Cassandra and Chris, I do find I think going through the business direct piece, you know, now that we're ramping up into this huge pension solution, I just wonder if we could work together to figure out a way for you to, in your reporting to, I don't know, to get a better, I think the categories are lined out really well, but maybe there's a more efficient or effective way that we can, I think I just always feel like, you know, as a board, we're supposed to provide oversight on these big projects, and that's sort of your job, is to kind of help us get that oversight. And I just wonder if there's maybe a different formatting or a different way that we might, moving forward with the pension solution project, do that, just getting feedback from different folks. I'd like to kind of maybe have that be a project that maybe, you know, we can work on with you guys, and then, you know, talk to you a little bit more. Because sometimes I feel like it's easy for me on these big projects to kind of hear you and just kind of, you know, and I think there's maybe ways we could highlight what are the key areas of concern, but maybe not go through all of the categories every time.
Yeah,
Because I find that I start kind of, you know, it's
Easy to
big
glaze
and
over.
wonky, and it's important, and I think that's one of our most important jobs, is to provide oversight. So I want to make sure I'm engaged, but I also feel like part of our role as board members is to pay attention to the things that are of concern. And I guess I'm just feeling like maybe there's a way we can improve that process.
So let me
a bit.
make a suggestion, if we could just make note of this, and then we can follow up with staff, that we set aside some time in person with the leadership of the board, with Graham, Chris, and Cassandra, to really flesh out some of these issues that have been raised, so that what's delivered to us is meeting our needs. Okay, so why don't we do that? We meet in April, so if we could just.
add that to one of our upcoming monthly
We'll
updates.
do
We
it.
can just add some time to do
We
it.
just have to carve
Yeah.
out the time on
do that.
everyone's schedule to make that happen.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to do that. I think we've gone sort of up and down on the detail level over time, and I think it's finding that right piece.
Needs of our board. So clearly, we're hearing that there's a gap, and we want to close that, so our needs are being met, and I'm confident we'll do that by just getting together and setting aside time. Great. Mr. Unterman?
I feel less of a need to oversee this project, which is gonna last for 5 years. And, you know, it's like being a spectator in a marathon. You can only check in at every 5 miles. So I don't know if any of you have ever tried to watch someone close to you run a marathon, but it's.
Oh, there's another map, okay.
But it seems to me what I would want to know is, hey, the wheels are coming off, or the software that we've chosen just doesn't work. And so, I mean, it's nice to get these charts in our board book, and we can glance at them and all that. But I want a memo that says, you know, things are generally going okay within the range of expected issues on something that's going to take 5 years, and you're going to have a lot of personnel turnover and all that sort of stuff. I don't need to know about all the turnover unless you say the new person coming in isn't qualified. You know, otherwise, what I want to know is, hey, there's a big problem, or there's headline risk here, or one of our key vendors is being acquired, and we don't know what its role is going to be in the company. Because we get a lot of data otherwise, which is not very meaningful, or something we can do anything about. So much like Paul's comment on our risk, I don't know if you were here for the discussion on our risk matrix, categorizing impact, I think, is really the key. And my guess is the hay alert is going to be rare.
So, Tom, to that point, in setting up the monthly phone conversations, I think I outlined there were like 3 or 4 questions. Are we on budget? Are we on time? Is there a major risk or problem that the board needs to be aware of? Overall, how are we doing? That's kind of what the leadership talks about. So maybe when we meet, maybe that's what we'll start bringing back to us. So that's what I asked when I had the phone call. Just answer 3 or 4 questions.
Well, I'm happy you're meeting monthly. I mean,
It's a phone call.
Yeah, but I mean, I'd really be shocked
Right.
No, your
if
point's
really the
well
need
taken.
is not quarterly or semi-annually, except expecting a call from our advisor saying, oh no, we gotta talk sooner.
Right.
Because, you know,
It's a
monthly
marathon.
for 6 years is a long time.
It was a long time.
Okay, very, very good. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you, guys. Thank you. Item 17 is referrals by the committee for board direction. Do we have any? I'm gonna need a little help. It's late in the day.
I have a few of them. I have a request for more detailed reports on the pension solution project, request for email list of the authors for the sponsored bills, matrix of priorities as to the risk, and a legend on each page on that same report. Request for the most current slides and changing the font on the chart, and then also the meeting that you plan to come up with to discuss.
19 is the draft agenda for the next committee meeting. I just would like to point out a couple of items. We'll be selecting the board chair and vice chair in April. There's no campaigning between now and then. No campaigning. We don't do that. We'll be taking action on our fiduciary council. And Joy and myself will be meeting with Brian and Jack in Glendale, the 26th of this month, with some candidates that have been paper screened. And I thank Joy for carving out a full day to do that work. And then we'll come with some finalists. And as Jack said earlier, it's probably going to be a couple of hours of time.
Did we say how many? I mean, how many finalists you guys will bring to us?
How many finalists do we think
Is
we're
it
going to bring?
just
We're not sure, right?
However much you enjoy.
5 semifinalists, so
Yeah.
with some 3.
But I think you should draw the line where the quality breaks, you know?
Yeah. We did this a few years back, and
Yeah,
it
we did
seemed to
3 or
work
4.
out quite well.
Yeah,
In fact,
There's
yeah,
a natural
it
break.
was a couple of years ago.
yeah.
And then we had the interviews upstairs, if I recall.
Yep.
Yeah, so,
Okay.
all right. There's also a very important closed session item. It's listed as item 19, is an information item. It's on the agenda. It's around risk.
Right.
It's a risk issue.
And did you, anybody also note that item number 10, the fiduciary insurance review? So you've retained a broker, so now you'll be actually hearing from the insurance brokers, right, presentation, is that what it is? Yeah.
And Brian, is this the one in which the actual policy itself, you'll send us what the proposed policy?
Oh, see that.
Yeah, there will be a presentation by the broker, an educational piece, and then there are proposals for different contracts.
Very good. There were some suggestions that when a board retains their fiduciary insurance, that Sharon and I, when we were at Rotman, some good suggestions came out of that. We can have a side conversation, Brian and Sharon and I, really some good suggestions and questions that a board should be asking relative to this type of insurance. So we'll make sure we communicate and get that in advance for the board. So that's really it. It's a pretty big, and then we have tomorrow, we have investments, which is a big, April's a big month for investments too, so it's going to be a full day and some important work.
Legislation introduced, we may have to take some positions on bills, so yeah, that's pretty full agenda for April for sure. Yeah.
Good. Loretta, were you going to close us out?
Is it time?
There's always time for you, Ms. Tottenberg.
Well, Loretta Toggenberger, United Teachers Los Angeles, retired. Wish to thank Cassandra Lichnot for being our speaker at the UTLA General Assembly. We had 175, and she put on a PowerPoint with really good information. I'm getting calls, and I'm meeting different retirees, very well received with the information. The PowerPoint, obviously, our retirees really want to know more in retirement about their retirement. After her speech, they came up. I've heard different ones, and she was well received, and we want to thank her and Cal Stirs for giving us the good information. Thank you.
Loretta, thank you. Anything else? For those of you on the board that have not met Loretta, at some point you really should meet her. She's an extremely special and wonderful person. She's one of the great people in California. She really is a terrific person I've gotten to know, and she's really a great person. So if you haven't met her, just say hello to her sometime. She's great. Okay, anything else?
Just a couple announcements, right?
Yeah, we have an announcement from Sharon. I said you're special, Loretta.
Retired teacher. More importantly,
That's-
retired teacher, collecting a
It's
California
okay.
pension.
She doesn't listen to me anyway.
So just a couple announcements for the board. We're having, I think, our first since I've been on our first board-only dinner, and we're going to be meeting at Mulvaney's at 6:30. So I think I've talked to everyone about transportation. I think Paul's taking a couple folks, and so meet there at 6:30. We're meeting in the back room, and just for public disclosure, I guess, we're all just chipping in. CalSTRS is not paying for this dinner, so just FYI, your credit cards out. And then, but
Dang, now you
I
tell
know,
me.
I'm sorry. Jack was offered to pay for all of us. but I
Okay,
guess he's
I'll
not.
take your card.
So, but no, we're looking forward to just having some time as a board just to hang out, and especially, getting to know you more, Betty, will be fun. So, and then the other thing I just wanted to mention was tomorrow is a full day. I know Harry and I are working on next year's calendar and things like that, but for, tomorrow it's going to be a full day starting at 9 a.m. So after dinner, and those in the audience, just get some good sleep, and we'll see you back here at 9 a.m. tomorrow, all right? So thanks, everyone.